Sects within Islam. Most Christians think of Islam as being one large monolithic religion, but just as there are branches within Christianity, like the Catholics and Protestants, Islam also has its various sects. The two main branches within Islam are the Sunnis and the Shias. Sunni Muslims are in the majority almost everywhere, except in Iran, Iraq, Bahrain, and Azerbaijan, where the majority are Shias. The Sunni branch. The term Sunni comes from Sunnah, an Arabic word meaning the well-trodden path, or in other words, the customary or traditional way of doing something. The Sunni branch of Islam is the majority traditional branch. After Muhammad's death, the majority of his followers accepted the choice made by the small committee, who quickly selected Abu Bakr, Muhammad's father-in-law and friend, to be their new leader. A sizable number of Muslims, though, called the Shia, or party, of Ali, wanted Muhammad's nephew Ali to be caliph, believing that only a direct relative of Muhammad should rule Islam. Ali himself felt he should have been chosen, but he finally accepted the majority's decision. Since he was still young, he knew his time would come. Ali's chance finally came when the third caliph, Uthman, was murdered. Ali was then chosen to be caliph, but immediately he had to face rebellions because of doubts about whether he was responsible for Uthman's death. A struggle for power arose, ultimately between Ali and the head of Uthman's family named Muawiyah. Ali was later murdered in a mosque, and the Umayyad leader Muawiyah became caliph. The Sunni majority accepted the defeat of Ali and the rule of the Umayyads, but the Shia, or party of Ali, rejected it. In this way began the separation of Sunni and Shia. Although their differences were in the beginning mainly political, arising out of the question of leadership over Islam, theological differences also developed over time between them. During the Abbasid dynasty in the 800s, the Mu'tazila controversy arose within Islam concerning whether the Quran was eternal and a part of God, or created, and whether man truly had a free will or not. The Abbasid rulers sided with the free-thinkers, who felt that the Quran was created and that man's will was free. This was contrary to most Muslims' belief that the Quran was eternal and that man's destiny was written already. The Abbasid rulers persecuted those who disagreed with them, but in the end a strong popular backlash forced them to finally give in and accept the majority's opinions. This and other controversies helped the Sunni to define its own beliefs, which became the traditional and well-defined way, the belief of the majority Muslim community. An abundance of hadith came to be attributed to the Prophet to the effect that Muslims must follow the majority's way, and that minority groups are all doomed to hell, and that God's protective hand is always on the majority of the community, which can never be in error. The Shia branch. The Shia, or party of Ali, after splitting with the Sunnis over the issue of who would rule Islam, became the party of opposition, and saw themselves as the true Muslims trying to bring restoration and renewal to Islam. While the Sunnis accepted the rule of the Umayyad caliphs, claiming that Allah would never lead the majority astray, the Shias responded that the opinion of the majority was fallible and so was not to be trusted. The Shias accepted only the family of Muhammad as true leaders of Islam, believing that only they had the spiritual light and authority to rule, and in this way the Shiite doctrine of the Imam began to develop. The Imams, who are direct descendants of Muhammad through the line of Ali, were eventually believed to be living manifestations of God, spiritually endowed with special wisdom and light to interpret the Quran. There would be no other prophet to come after Muhammad, but the Imams were seen by Shiites as in some ways just as great as the prophet. While the Imam does not receive prophetic revelations as Muhammad did, he is given the divine illumination to spiritually interpret them, and only he can properly interpret the Quran and show Muslims what is the true path to follow. The Imam is immune from sin and error, much like the Catholic Pope with his infallible authority. The Sunnis believed that the community had the right to choose who would be its caliph or leader, but the Shias believed the right to be Imam, their version of the caliph, was conferred by divine decision only. The Shias were strongly persecuted by the Umayyad and Abbasid caliphs, and until the line of the 12th Imam, all the Imams were murdered in one way or another. The 12th and final Imam disappeared as a child in the year 873 and was never seen again. Shias now believe that this hidden Imam named Muhammad is still alive and guiding the world, and will one day return to take control over Islam and the world. Some Shias believe Jesus will come back with his armies at the end to help the Imam conquer the world for the Shiites. Shiites also believe there are hidden levels of meaning in the Quran, beyond the strictly literal meaning of the verses. They also have some other traditions which are different than the Sunnis. For example, they believe that there are only 3 daily prayers rather than the 5 of the Sunnis. The content of the ritual daily prayers is a little different from the Sunnis too. In Shiite Islam, divorce is more difficult, and inheritances for women are more liberal. A special kind of marriage is allowed, however, called muta, in which a man may make a marriage contract lasting for a month, a week, a day, or even for an hour. Sunnis rightly see this as just legalized prostitution. Although all Muslims agree that muta was recognized and practiced in Muhammad's time, Sunnis think the practice was outlawed by the second Caliph Umar and so is now abrogated. The Shias also have a doctrine called taqiyya, which permits the telling of lies when one is in danger. Shias also have some different holy places such as Karbala in Iraq, where Hussein was massacred, and other sites like the graves of certain Muslim saints where people come to pray. Shiites comprise most of the Muslims in Iran and Iraq, with large numbers also in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Turkey. Within Shiite Islam there are 2 main sects, called the Twelvers and the Seveners. There's also a minor sect called the Fivers or Zaydites. Each sect's name is based on which imam each group considered to be the final imam. Sufis. Within Islam, another movement developed in its early centuries called Sufism. Sufis are found in all branches of Islam, though in some ways they have more in agreement with the Shia branch. Sufis are the mystics of Islam, Muslims who seek to experience God. According to Orthodox Islam, man is a slave, the slave of God, whose duty is to blindly submit and obey. Man in his slaveness and God in his great superiority are far, far apart, and the two can never ever meet. This is the Orthodox Muslim's idea. But within man's heart there is a deep hunger to know God, to have a personal relationship with God that can never be satisfied with dry, empty formulas and rituals. Sufism is the Muslim attempt to meet this need of the human heart. Sufism began as a reaction to the worldliness seen in the early Umayyad period from 661 to 749. There was a growing dissatisfaction by many Muslims with the worldliness of Islam, and as Orthodox Islam was developing its traditional views of what was proper ritual and conduct for a Muslim, some Muslims began hungering for more than just a formal external religion. Ascetics arose who were meditating on the Judgment Day, and who became known as those who always weep, and as those who consider this world to be just a hut of sorrows. Later in the 700s, a female mystic introduced the Sufi concept of love for God that was unselfish, not based on fear of hell or hope of heaven. The mystical trend began to grow all over the Islamic world, and was probably influenced in many ways through contact with Christian hermits and monks. Schools of Sufi thought began to develop over time, and later on fraternal orders were formed, each centered around a Sufi teacher who was similar to an Indian guru with his disciples. Sufis believe that there are stages a disciple passes through on his way to the hidden knowledge of God. A teacher is always necessary to guide one in the way, and various methods are used like dhikr or remembrance. In dhikr, the means used to bring God into remembrance include chanting the 99 wonderful names of God using a rosary, or repeating the name of Allah over and over again, or repeating other religious formulas. Sometimes in dhikr, Sufis will start speaking in tongues or go into trances. Sometimes dances and music are used, as for example the whirling dervish branch of Sufis, who spin around and around until they go into ecstatic trances. Drugs and narcotics have also been used by some groups. Sufis say that Muhammad was the first Sufi because of his mystical experiences, and Sufis have greatly influenced Islamic beliefs about Muhammad, making him almost divine. In their writings and poetry, Muhammad is described as light from light, and from his light all the prophets are created. And God is said to have told Muhammad, "If you had not been, I would not have created the world." Sufis have also encouraged the widespread prayer and worship at the shrines of Muslim saints and other folk Islamic practices within Islam. Sufis often interpret the Quran allegorically, And in Sufism, the external elements of Islam, like the 5 pillars, are de-emphasized, while emphasis is put on the internal and on seeking for an experiential knowledge of God, which means to become absorbed into God, to become one with God. This is all heresy to the Orthodox Muslim, and Sufis are generally viewed as being backward and ignorant. Many Sufis won't openly admit they are Sufis. Early Sufis tended to travel, to be people of poetry, song, and symbol, and they were mainly responsible for the massive expansion of Islam after the 9th century to places like India, Central Asia, Turkey, and Africa below the Sahara Desert. They often incorporated local pre-Islamic beliefs into Islam, which have been the source of much folk Islam, but which brought more of a willingness to convert to Islam. Other groups. Some of the numerous other groups within Islam are the Druze, a secretive Shia offshoot mainly living in Lebanon that refuses to accept converts; the Baha'is from Iran, a universalist religion popular in the West; the Alawites, another Shiite offshoot in Syria, who say Ali was divine; and the Ahmadiyya, founded in Punjab, India, in 1889 by a man who claimed to be the Christian Messiah, the Hindu god Krishna, and Muhammad all rolled up into one. His followers say Jesus was crucified but didn't die, recovering from his wounds in the tomb, and they say he later went to Kashmir, where he died and was buried at 120 years of age. Black Muslims found in the United States are more of a racial social protest movement, though they have become more mainstream Islamic in recent